Hello everyone, my name is Paige Rodriguez and this is my presentation on Gothic fantasy for assignment number 2. Let's brew up a potion of Gothic fantasy together. We only need a couple of key ingredients, which you can switch out to your liking. First up, we need a spooky setting. This can be a castle or mansion, especially ones that are half abandoned work really well, or even a graveyard. And to really emphasize the Gothicness of the fantasy setting, it needs to feel tense or unsettled. The characters are usually losing their mind, feeling as if they're at their wits' end. They hear noises. We also want to throw in a splash of some visions or sightings because this also brings out that tense feeling. Unexplainable events are also a key ingredient. Again, going back to hearing noises or realizing that things are moving around when someone perhaps lives alone, or do those animals have human eyes? And our potion could never really work without high emotions. Fear, suspense, romance. My nerves feel frayed already. Finally, to finish off our brew, most, if not all, great Gothic fantasy novels have a general sense of doom and or horror or terror. Mix it all together, let it steep in a 19th century Victorian teapot for 5 minutes, and you will have brewed the perfect Gothic fantasy novel. Okay, all jokes aside, while those elements do make up the basis for a Gothic fantasy novel, it's also important to know how and where they originated. Horace Walpole is often cited as the father of Gothic fantasy with his 1706 novel, The Castle of Otteranto, which I might be pronouncing incorrectly. Additionally, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's Frankenstein from 1818 was, and still is, an extremely important novel to both Gothic fantasy and the science fiction genres. Gothic literature also became very popular in 19th century England, and you may wonder why specifically during this time. Well, there was a lot of uncertainty during this era. The Industrial Revolution was exploding, the British Empire was rapidly expanding, and the women's rights movements was gaining traction, which is also a reason why women are often featured in Gothic fantasy, because as we saw before, fear of the unknown is what scares us, and fear of women apparently gaining more independence and autonomy was frightening. Here you can see two other examples from that area with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson and Dracula by Bram Stoker. And if we look at some modern Gothic fantasy, these tend to have overlapping subgenres. For example, Three Dark Crowns by Kendara Blake is romantasy, Gothic fantasy, court intrigue, witches, all rolled into one. Same with Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahern, which features covens of witches and centers more around the church and burning heretical witches, but it still contains some of those fears of the unknown among the witch hunters and, of course, high emotions, lust, fear. Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco is set in Victorian London and is about a young woman named Audrey who studies forensic medicine, secretly, because this is 19th century England after all, and she begins to investigate the Jack the Ripper killings. As you can see, this one also has a bit of a crossover with historical fantasy, similar to My Plain Jane by Brodie Ashton, Cynthia Han, and Jodi Meadows, which is a supernatural, but comedic, retelling of Jane Eyre, another novel which in itself falls under Gothic fantasy. Here, I created two QR codes which feature book lists from the San Jose Public Library staff recommending YA Gothic fiction books. It was surprisingly one of the few lists I could find that was kept pretty up to date. And of course, there's always Goodreads' lists that are tagged as Gothic and span multiple age ranges, subgenres, and years. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my presentation, and I hope this has helped you learn a little bit more about Gothic fantasy. Happy reading!